I do remember running up and wanting to be baptized, because that's what they told me was the next thing, and I wanted to just jump into
Yeah.
this relationship fully committed, and I never did it for a long time. So I used that for an excuse for a long time.
Yeah.
Well, I was never baptized, so that must be why I'm sinning so much, or
Yeah.
allowing me to myself to do these things.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mighty Oaks Show. Glad to have you with us today. Hope you are having a great week and looking forward to a wonderful weekend. Thank you for joining us. I am always grateful to spend this time with you. If you are watching on YouTube, thank you for doing that. Go ahead, if you have not yet, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and then leave us a comment, share this content out. That would be helpful for us and hopefully helpful for whoever you send it to. And that's why we produce all of this, is as a help, and trust that that's the case. If you're listening over at Mojo 50 or you're listening to the podcast, thank you for doing that as well. Take some time when this show is over. Go over to YouTube. You can search for the Mighty Oaks Foundation or Mighty Oaks Programs. Our channel will come up. Hit that. Go ahead and subscribe, hit the notification bell, etc., etc. We want to make sure you have all the content, and the show is great. This is what we do every week, of course, and we push this show out every Friday for the YouTube audience and the social media audience, and on Saturday for our Mojo audience. But we have a lot of other content that we push out as well. Every week we're busy producing content designed to help you. So please take some time to jump over and check that out. Also, if you are not following the Mighty Oaks Foundation's social media, please do that as well. You can find us on Facebook, find us on Twitter if you're still on Twitter, if anyone is still over there. I don't know if anyone's still there. But if you're still there, go ahead and follow us. You can also follow us on Instagram. We're very, very active over on Instagram actually right now. So check that out as well. And that would be awesome. Again, thank you for joining us. This is the show where we do our best as we work through various topics to tell stories, but really tell stories that give hope. And this is what we do as an organization. We work very diligently across the country, just about every day, to give hope to those who have experienced trauma and trials in their own lives, those who have served in the military. And we have the opportunity, thankfully, to retell those stories here. And I'm glad that you would join us and have actually a friend on today that I've known for some time. Glenn Rosenbaum is with us. Glenn is former United States Army. And when you have friends, you just have to deal with stuff. And sometimes you have to deal with them having been in the Army. That's one of the things you have to deal with sometimes. But Army pilot, and now serves on our team at the Mighty Oaks Foundation. Glenn, thanks for joining us, man. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on here today. I appreciate it as well.
How long have you been working with Mighty Oaks?
It's been about 5 years now.
Yeah.
I'm still working on my fifth year, I think. It's not quite 5 years, but we're starting our fifth year here.
Yeah, I was going to say it's been about 5 years, which is crazy how fast time flies, man. It's nuts.
Right?
And you are hailing from the great state of Montana, where snow is something that's actually expected, unlike other places of the country. So
exactly. And colder too.
And it's cold. We did a program there. Wasn't the first time, maybe the second time I had been to Montana, we did a program. And it was nuts, man. Like, it was 75 degrees one day and snowing and freezing the next day because Montana, I guess. But anyhow.
Yeah, our seasons don't know when to come and
go. But it's great to have you and great to talk. You have a really unique story, and we'll get to a lot of that. But let's start by just tell us your story from where you grew up and how you grew up, the family that you were in, and the thing or things that led you into the military.
Okay, yeah, that's so I come from, I love my family. I come from a veteran family. My grandfather was in the military. My father was in the military. I was born to my father and my mother actually during his military career right after Vietnam. I didn't spend a lot of time, or he didn't spend a lot of time after I was born in the military, but I was born to my parents over in Frankfurt, Germany. And my dad at that time was also a Vietnam veteran. Well, he still is. But so I was born to them over in Frankfurt, Germany, and shortly after I was born, he decided that the military career was not for what he wanted for him and his family. So he left the military and moved to Montana. Early on in that relationship, I was about 3 years old. By this time, I had one brother, uh, and my parents. I don't know the whole story behind it, but I do know that my parents were struggling. My dad was struggling from his post combat struggles, as well as while he was in the military, he lost his father early on, so he didn't have any guidance there. Uh, so in my family, divorce came early. I was about 3 years old. My brother was one. They divorced and separated. My father stayed in Great Falls, Montana, which was where we were living initially, and then my mother moved to a little town called Shoto, Montana. I spent the rest of my life in Shoto, Montana, other than visiting my father in Great Falls and spending 1 year with him, living with him to try that out. Probably uh, the only reason that year happened was because I had a troubled youth, but I'll get to that. So they divorced. We moved to Shoto. Still wasn't That wasn't very traumatic for me. I know it was difficult even then, not understanding why I couldn't live with my mother and my father. And even through the divorce process, I still remember the judge asking me very early on, who do you want to live with? And I thought that was a very stupid question to ask a kid of 3 years old, to even ask him to make that choice. And I told him both. And then
Yeah.
even at that age, when I remember leaving and walking out and seeing my parents one after the other, and they asked me, well, what they say in there? And I told them, I says, well, they asked me who I wanted to live with. And to each parent, even at that age, I knew I couldn't tell them the truth. So I told each one, I said, you
Yeah.
know,
Right. Right.
I couldn't tell them both. So, I mean, while it was a difficult time and an unnatural, experience for a kid at 3 years old, um, life went on. I found myself, it was kind of in the middle of the winter. I had just turned 4 shortly after that divorce. My brother was 2. We, uh, we lived kind of on the east side of the tracks in a small town, if you can have an east and a west side. And, but we were on the outside edge of town. We were kind of in this trailer house, not even the trailer house court, but just on the edge of town. I love the location now looking back. It allowed a lot of opportunities for a kid to be free. But early on in my life, and at that age, spring came around. My brother and I found ourselves looking for friends, and long story short, we went out looking for friends, and we found a house where um, things would really change my life. And I know this is kind of jumping into the weeds early. I knew I had a problem with this in my life, but early on, there were some scars that happened right after that divorce, and one of them being, and I normally don't get to this fast in my
Yeah.
testimony.
Well,
uh,
this is a safe space. You're in that room all by yourself.
yeah, right. Yeah, this is just between you and I, right?
Right.
Oh no, it was. Long story short, I went looking for friends. I found a location where there was actually a kid my age, and I'm not going to mention any names. Uh, but immediately there came this opponent of sexual trauma and abuse into
Yeah.
my life,
Yeah.
where I was abused. I'm not going to go into details here because your
Sure.
show.
Sure. Sure.
Um, so that happened very early in my life, and then I started school. I went from kindergarten through high school in Shoto, Montana. I love the town. I love my classmates. Um, but from that point to that sexual trauma, I really struggled with the divorce, with the trauma that happened to me, and I never discussed it. That was just something you never discussed with anybody in that town. I don't even think some people in that town would believe that that was going on, in a little town like that. So I struggled with that. I struggled with socializing. I had a lot of anger issues, friendship issues. I seemed to always be gravitated to one of two things. One was women at an early age. Because of that abuse, I learned unnaturally the desire a man should have for a woman, and I pursued that pretty vigorously as a child when I shouldn't even had been concerned with that in
Right.
one's life. So I had those struggles. I did meet some friends. They were good friends, and they were bad friends. Good in the sense, I found a place where I could at least have a relationship with somebody that when we didn't while we didn't abuse each other, we supported, the other abuses in
Yeah.
life that kids can do to themselves, and the kind of destructive nature that I had. I continued my life, continuing with my life, excuse me. Made it through that. I struggled a lot in school. Um, Not as far as grades. I was actually very smart. Once I realized that grades weren't that important, those started to slip. So it wasn't that I wasn't smart. It was just that I chose
Right.
to not put my energy and time into that, but rather
Sure.
into my what I know now as my lusts, my lust of my flesh. When it came to alcohol, I started drinking at an early age. Hung out with that crowd pretty early, and became kind of old, just a little bit. uh, so back then, 70s and 80s, long hair was a thing. The cutoff t-shirts, half shirts, mesh shirts. So I started doing that. I got a tattoo very early on in my life, and at the time it seemed like a lot of fun, but it was really, really looking back. I just wish I would have done a lot of things different, because it really did affect the rest of my life and the decisions I made from that point forward. Hitting high school, coming out of high school, I wasn't sure I wanted a military career. I knew as a child I loved it. My dad was in the military. I really respected what he did. Uh, in case I didn't say it yet, I'm a pilot, and so was my father. So I kind of followed in his
Mm.
footsteps. Um, so I knew I wanted to, but when I first got out of high school, I didn't want to. I didn't want that responsibility. I didn't want to deal with anything. I was very immature with that, and I was very resistant to the idea of discipline being forced upon me. Long story short, I with some friends got on probation for something, just being acquaintance with them, and not saying not to do it, but I ended up on probation, and that kind of woke me up, and I knew I needed to do something different, and I needed to get out of Shoto, because otherwise I was going to, even though I didn't sense it, I just knew it was not going to be healthy for me for the rest of my life. I would also like to say before that I also had probably the biggest reason I joined the military was at that time I had met my future wife. Um, we we did things that obviously weren't within the design of what two people meeting each other should do, and we upon graduating high school, I had uh, the girl that would eventually become my wife was pregnant. So I also had to face that responsibility in my life. What am I going to do now with the son away? And um, hopefully, we hadn't agreed to marry yet. Um, a future wife,
Yeah.
what was I going to do? And because I hadn't set really a lot of foundational stuff there, I was really being military was a kind of last option,
Yeah.
and so I did it. I joined the military.
Yeah. Crazy. Yeah, I would be interested to know how many people that was the last option for. It's like, well, I've burned about every other bridge I have, so let me try this. And for a lot of people, it does work out well. What was the faith conversation in your life when you were growing up? Was there one? Were there people of faith in your life? Did you
Yeah,
have any connection to church at all or anything?
yeah. So initially, I did not, and I say that till up till about age 7. Through the divorce, through that sexual trauma that I experienced very early on, and the result of that was that introduction of, as I know it now, that the evil that was done unto me, I kind of adopted it as my own and started abusing myself. And I won't go into details on that,
Sure.
but it was very dangerous. Not only was I abusing myself, but I was still, this abuse went on for quite a few years till about 7. And the trigger at age 7 was after the divorce, my father did not get to have any custody. The courts decided that he, uh, with whatever wisdom they had, that my dad lost his rights. And at age 7 or thereabouts, he got the parental rights back. And so we were able to visit him. During this time frame, my dad had got re-immersed into the church himself. And so when I went back to visit with him, he was going to, I think it was called First Baptist Church in Great Falls, Montana. And it was one weekend I got to visit with him that they had this bus ministry. We rode the bus. We got off, we went downstairs, and there was this pastor there. And I still remember his sermon. It was about David and Goliath.
Hmm.
And it wasn't so much that, at that time I didn't really understand, the strength he had in his faith. I just knew that I had some major giants that I needed out of my life. Um, and I just knew this. And then there came this altar call, and I just felt this movement to get up and move out. And funny enough, I say not funny, I shouldn't use that word. Um, Rather, coincidentally, the people that had been trained to lead you through the gospel story and the gospel message, to witness to you, were teenage boys
Mm.
and girls, and and of the same age as my abusers, um, that I had been experiencing. So I had a fear for kids. I say kids because that's what they were.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't have any fear. I went with this guy, and the gospel message was laid out to me, and the movement in my heart was just so intense that I confessed Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior at 7 years old,
Mm.
um, and truly believe that God raised him from the dead. And the beautiful part of that in the story for me was, after this time, during the summer spending with my father, I went back to Shoto, and the family moved out of town. Coincidence or God's hand in my
Yeah.
life, I don't
Yeah.
know. Um, I tend to lean towards God, you know, keeping his promises. The sad part was, while there was a wonderful period of just calm in my life, family, peace, and joy, over time, within the next few years, I found myself going back to wanting to abuse myself. So I became, as I like to, as I know it now, a very unruly Christian. Um, I was very weak. Um, I wasn't so much faint-hearted, but I was a very weak in my faith, and I have no excuse for that. A lot of times I blame the church, and I blamed other people. I blamed maybe my parents, uh, and sporadically throughout my life in that time of youth, I found myself every once in a while that urging to go back into the church, and on my own. My parents, my mom and Shota did not attend church. My father, while when we were with him, he did attend church at least for a period, and then went away when he moved to Helena, Montana. But it was kind of like a back and forth, and
Yeah.
really was because I didn't choose to become stronger in my own faith.
Yeah.
I know that now looking back.
It's interesting because we talk about this often with the folks that we work with, but just in life, there's a process that we call discipleship. It's someone who's a little further along in their faith and their understanding of Scripture, investing in the person who is perhaps new to the faith or is coming along. And absent of that, what you end up with is what you just described. Is you're in Christ, you are a Christian, you've given your life to Christ in that sense, but no direction, no connection, and no growth. And that's not to say it's someone else's fault, but it is to acknowledge the importance of having the right people in your life, not just getting rid of the wrong people.
Oh, exactly. No, whether it's a peer based or like you're saying, the discipleship based, um, I really had no excuse. There was moments where I had those opportunities, and I could have invested myself in there. And I like to say I would try it,
Yeah.
and then while I'm trying it, over here would be this temptation. I'd be like, oh, but
Yeah.
God.
Right. Yeah.
And for some reason, I would go that direction. I even made the excuse I wasn't baptized till late in my 30s.
Hmm.
And I do remember when my confession was made. I do remember running up and wanting to be baptized, because that's what they told me was the next thing, and I wanted to just jump into
Yeah.
this relationship fully committed, and I never did it for a long time. So I used that for an excuse for a long time.
Yeah.
Well, I was never baptized, so that must be why I'm sinning so much, or
Yeah.
allowing me to myself to do these things.
Have you ever looked back at your childhood and thought, as a dad, these are some things I learned during that time that I want to invest different, teach different, um, mentor different, be different. Some things that you would tell a dad if you were sitting down with a young man who maybe is a new father or something, and you say, hey, here are some things you need to do to invest in your child that you're bringing into the world and raising up. What are some of those things that you would look at and say, these are the things I wish someone had done for me?
I would just one of the things I wish I would have learned, even after that, as I had children. I have 4 children and a beautiful wife. I have 3 grandchildren, and in all that, I would tell the father to develop that relationship, even though it's not a peer-to-peer relationship. It's a father-son relationship. Develop that relationship where your son or your daughter knows that you're willing to hear. If Scripture says we got to be quick to hear, slow to speak, and I know this has a different. Uh, it only has one translation, but as far as application, I love the verse where it says, "Be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, because out of the anger of man comes no righteousness." And if at any point in my life, like I finally experienced with Mighty Oaks, I would have known I had this open avenue, whether with a peer or somebody who was discipling me, or as I now know for sure, without a doubt, vertically, a
Yeah,
father who will just listen, um, not to what you have to say, but just that open communication where they can tell you anything, and it's not going to change how much they love you or care for you.
right.
Whether it's what somebody has done to them, or in what would be probably a more traumatic experience is what they've done to someone else, what evil they've done.
Yeah,
um, just where you can do that, where you can confess one to another type
that's
principle,
right. Yeah,
and find encouragement, correction, and comfort. I know that's in a nutshell,
that's good.
but we only got an hour.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think a lot of young parents, they don't think about any of these things because they're just trying to survive. And we talk about planning ahead of time what you're going to do. Resiliency is making a decision ahead of time. It's a pre-decision. It's all these things. Parenting is not different than that. We need to think about some of these things before our kids are 10, 11, 12 years old, and now we're just trying to manage what we didn't do when they were younger. Yeah, having that relationship is so important. Man, it's so important. Um, we'll move on. So you went into the military. You didn't start out as a pilot, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
No, I started out as I joined the military as a private. Went into the maintenance side of aviation, and that's again Army aviation, not Air Force aviation. And it's just a little higher caliber, just in case there's any Air Force
In case
brothers
there's
out there
anyone
listening.
wondering. Yeah. Thanks for clearing that up for us. Appreciate it.
Oh wait, the Marines have that too, don't they? They have aviation.
They certainly do. Yes, they do. Yep.
All right, go Army. No. Yeah, so I went into aviation. Started out as a mechanic. As I progressed, I became an NCO. Upon becoming an NCO, I became a crew chief and a door gunner on the UH-60 Blackhawk. Spent probably so the first 10 years of my military career were as an enlisted NCO, a mechanic, crew chief, door gunner. Did a couple deployments. Um, my very last deployment as an enlisted NCO was from Kuwait, right before September 11th. We came back. Uh, I think it was literally like 2.5 weeks right before September 11th happened, and we were
Wow.
in Doha area of Kuwait. We just got back, just got reintegrated back into our families, and of course back to work. And September 11th happened. At this time, even though this was happening, and the two wars that we now know in our generations was about to kick off, I was slated to go to flight school. I'd been selected for warrant officer school and in flight school. So I left January immediately following September 11th and started walk school.
Wow.
Went through flight school. Flight school, it was really long. I mean, I spent a year and a half at Fort Rucker, Alabama, just trying to complete all my training because there was such a large influx of both warrant officer and officer candidates for flight school trying to beef up the military for the war that was going on and the other one kicking off. So there was a lot of bubbles where we were sitting around doing nothing.
Yeah.
And but it was about a year and a half. Beyond that, so once I got out of there, it was about 2003, right? Man, time gets harder to reflect
Yeah.
back on as you get
It
older,
goes fast, man.
right? I think I got that right. No, so I got out of flight school, went back, started RL progression with my unit. Um, Deployed in 2005 was when I finally got to. I say finally, that's when I finally deployed uh, to Iraq for my first deployment overseas. We were in Balad, Iraq at that time. Very 2004 and 2005 were pretty heavy for aircraft engagements, shoot downs, loss, um, especially down in the Taji Balad area. It was a rough year, but I did that. Came back. I knew it at the time, but I wasn't ready to acknowledge it. I had some serious issues upon coming back from that deployment. Um, we got off the plane. I avoided the welcome reception, grabbed my bags, walked through the flight ops of where we were brought back to. Got in the car with my family, went home, and there was a gathering there to meet me. And I sat in a corner all by myself. I was by myself, but I had all this
Right.
family here to greet
Right.
me, and I was very uncomfortable. It was not a good time. My dad, love him to death. He looked at me, and I think for one time we finally connected. He knew exactly what was going on to some degree,
Because
and he looked
he
at me
had
and says,
experienced
"Well,
that in Vietnam. I mean, probably the same.
yeah,
He understood what that was like coming back. Yeah.
yeah." He had a couple tours over there in Vietnam. One on the ground, boots on ground type of guy, and then one
Yeah.
as a warrant officer or an officer. Excuse me. He was an officer first. And so he looked at everybody and says, "Well, he's pretty tired, guys. We should probably go and let him get his rest." And my wife can attest to this. I laid in that bed with her that first night after not having seen her for over a year, and didn't want her to touch me. Um, Actually, just kind of gave her the cold shoulder and rolled over and went to sleep. Um, it was within about a week, that it finally exploded, and she just, in argument style, says, "Well, you should just leave." And I says, "Great, I will." And that's exactly what I was waiting for, right? For that another excuse in my life to leave. So I left her, found this little studio apartment off of this laundromat, which isn't hard to. It's really hard to find in Montana, that kind of combo.
Hmm.
Um, but I found this place, moved in there, and started drinking every night. Um, a lot of people in my life noticed it. My colonel noticed it. He tried helping. The chaplain tried helping. Family tried helping. But I just ignored him because I was still able to complete my mission as a military man, an aviator. At least I thought. And it was progressing. I did progress up through. Became a test pilot after that deployment, and but I was really struggling. I had a plan too. I finally had pushed away my family. I pushed my kids away. Uh, I pushed my brothers in the military away. I wasn't hanging out with them unless they enabled me, and if they couldn't keep up with me, then I left them in my dust. But I would drink every night. Every night I was drinking. Funny thing is, I didn't like to drink alone at home so much, so I'd always be at the bar. One of two bars or three bars, didn't matter, but someplace where I could walk home and then the next morning walk back to my truck and get to work and pretend everything was okay, get my work done. And then as soon as I left work, I would go get dinner at the
Yeah.
bar, and it was in a glass or a bottle. It came to a head. I had a plan. I'm not going to go through the plan, but long story short, I had this plan to kill myself, and I was putting that plan into action. The It was a very tough time. I do remember there was God definitely looking back into that. He put some things into play and was moved by prayer. Now I know that very day to stop that. Um, my plan could not be finished because somebody interrupted it, and for me to go back to it, it was going to be a plan by accidental death,
Yeah.
type
Right.
suicide. Where it wouldn't affect. I figured it wouldn't affect my kids. It wouldn't affect my family because it was accidental. They would
Right.
never find out. That was interrupted by God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and I found out later, after talking to my wife that day, she had been praying really hard. She had filed for divorce. We had been separated for a few years, and she had finally filed for divorce. It was coming through. I wasn't responding to that, so I'd lost all my parental rights. I did get to see my kids every other weekend, and I would stay sober for those events. But as soon as they were gone, I would go back to drinking. Um, but on this one day, and I didn't know it, but the Spirit must have known it, because my wife found herself praying really hard, and her sister got involved with the prayer. God intervened in me being able to complete that. And also that day, the pastor of the church that my wife was going to just happened to show up at my door and ask me. And I didn't know him. She was going to church, um, at his church, just to say, hey, if you ever need to talk or something, just want you to know I'm here. Your kids are doing great. And he started briefing me on how great my kids are doing,
Hmm.
in a loving way, not in a negative way.
Yeah.
And it really hit me. And I'm like, even with all this going on, I still screwed this up. So when he left, I literally told myself, I'm like, okay, I got to find a reason to live at least for a little bit longer here, because I have these kids. That shouldn't be the church's responsibility or my wife's to
Hmm.
take care of my kids. So I kind of started putting my identity and my faith into my kids. Um, I still didn't run that back to God like I should have. So I did that. I called Judy up and asked her if we could get back together under, really, I didn't really care that we got back together. I didn't really have the need for a woman in my life at this time. Um, but I figured if I could have my kids every day, maybe I could live.
Right.
To answer that question, for me to live, I
Right.
was putting my kids right behind that scripture. So I tried that for a few years. I didn't tell her that shortly after her agreeing to get back together, I had to go through marriage counseling with her. I had to quit drinking, which I could do because I had this other problem in my life, which was more than the alcohol, and that was sexual immorality and the flavor of pornography. The sin of pornography. I used to call it an addiction, but it's not. That was my number one medication for me in my life,
Hmm.
was that. So I agreed to. I was able to drop the alcohol. I say that easy. I did struggle really hard with that, and we got back together. Shortly after we got back together, we had another deployment coming up, which I didn't tell her about. And until we got back together, and it was agreed upon that I could have, for me to live, my answer, my kids every day.
Yeah.
And that was for another, in 2009, to Basra, Iraq. I deployed to Basra. That deployment was a little different. I didn't struggle with a lot of sins that I normally did before. The deployment wasn't that bad. It was harder on the ground than it was in the air, literally. And but it was just a year being gone. I say that it was very traumatic. There was trauma there as well.
Of course.
I'd like to rephrase that.
Yeah. Of course.
So again, we went to Basra in 2009, and this time, my wife and I really were somehow coming back together a little bit. So we tried to make this deployment different than the 2005 one. She tried to be more supportive, as much as she could from her side, and I tried to be uh, supportive of her as well and connected to her, so that I didn't have this year of disconnect coming back and then leave her again. We came back from that deployment. Our marriage was doing better. I was still struggling from some of the other trauma that happened during that deployment. Started seeing the VA, trying to get some of their help, but disconnected. I wasn't doing it through military circles. So I was kind of working that back door because I didn't want to be grounded as an
Yeah.
aviator.
Right. Yeah.
And long story short, I was still putting my identity in my kids. I started adding my wife to that. So now for me to live was my kids, my wife,
Yeah.
and my career.
Right.
That was it,
Right.
and that was my identity and purpose.
Yeah. Going back a little bit, was there an event or something that happened that caused you to go into that spiral after that first deployment, or was it just a lifetime of small things that kind of came to a head at that time? I think a lot of people have that question when they look at, we talk about military suicides and all these things, and you're always like, what happened? Was it something that happened? Was it a lot of stuff that just you had never dealt with? What was it that put you in that position?
Well, to be honest, what happened in the military was like only half of the story, obviously,
Yeah.
and half of the reason I had to be there. Um, for me, I went over there, and at this point in my life, um, I don't know if you ever see my hand analogy
I don't know.
that I came up with after we had that first team leader training session
Yeah.
3 or 4 years ago.
Yep.
There that was 3 years ago. I came back there and I had just lost one of my Mighty Oaks BFFs,
Hmm. Yeah.
and I was kind of in a wreck because I had put them into my answer. Also, for me to live is now uh, heavily weighted on my wife, my kids, my brotherhood, and then whatever I'm going to do in my life. And after that training session, I went home, obviously comforted, corrected, and encouraged by my brothers. But I started evaluating and I started looking at scripture to see, well, what is God's design in this? What am I missing here still after a year of being with Mighty Oaks? And I started looking at it. Well, my whole life, and coming up to that 2000 deployment, so this feeds into that. My success in my career, which I don't know if you can see this, but so the pinky is my career. I'd always, well, let me put it this way. Let me rephrase this. So my first priority in life was me and my career. It was
Yeah.
me and my selfishness, was me and my career. Um, and then the second priority in my life was brotherhood, my brothers in the military. I really thought brotherhood, man to man, bro, bumping chests, slamming beers back, chasing girls, whatever was second. Um, Even in high school, I had this opinion. When children came into my life with a wife, while the wife was really cool, my next priority was my children. That's where and then the last being my wife.
Yeah.
Um, I should say last, but in my life beyond that, because those were things horizontally I had to take care of. That I had to do. It was in my
Yeah.
face. But the one I missed was my relationship with God.
Right.
And so coming up to this deployment, I had my entire life upside down. So I came up with this hand analogy right after that I teach the guys. So the palm of the area is me in my life. And in my life, I'd always put my career first, which is important. God says we're supposed to be fruitful and labor in our work, right?
Yeah.
The second one says we are supposed to have brotherhood, man-to-man relationships, peer-to-peer relationships where we can stand together like David and Jonathan. The third one in my life is I knew I had my kids. So after my career and after my bros, if I had time left in my day or my week, I would try to give my kids some time before this O5 deployment. And my wife, while I said was not last, but she got the leftovers,
Yeah.
or when needed, I would go find her.
Sure.
And then the last one, the thumb, I like to do this because it's kind of separate from these three, is my relationship with God.
Yeah.
And I had this all backwards. And it wasn't until I came to Mighty Oaks and continued down this path of taking what I learned at a Mighty Oaks session and changing my life, that I realized I had this whole thing backwards.
Yeah. It's good.
And it should have been like this.
Yeah. It's good.
The difference, this is vertical, like we like to say that, but this is my identity and my purpose, first and foremost. While all these are important, my wife should come first. By his design in our lives, he said, as much as we love him and need him, he said, it's good for man not to be alone.
Sure.
I'll crave for him a helper. And we teach that quite a bit. But it's our, I had that backwards. And so I had to start putting her first and foremost in my life. God brought her into my life and gave her unto me. And that should be one of my first ministries in life.
Yeah.
Second was my children. Third would be my brotherhood. And fourth would be whatever he puts me in, whether it's working with Mighty Oaks or working in my local church, or working as a soldier in the military,
Right.
you know?
Right.
Um, so having all those backwards and then experiencing the innocence and ignorance that's removed from a soldier, an airman, or Marine, uh, law enforcement officer, first responder,
Of course.
anybody
Yep.
in their career, when that happens to all of us, if you're already starting at this deficit
Yeah.
of
Right.
having God down here instead of up here,
Right.
that's why I crashed.
Yeah.
That's why I crashed after that deployment.
Yeah. You're putting your confidence, your faith, your hope in things that just can't meet up to your expectations, can't fulfill your needs, can't take care of you, and that you weren't designed primarily to fulfill. God should be your number one priority because that's what you were designed to fulfill. It's to glorify Him with your life and then to serve others. I think it's interesting too the way you do that, because it takes the focus when you flip your hand over your priorities. It doesn't just put your focus on the right priorities. It takes your focus off of yourself, because it's not about your job. It's not about your friends. It's not about your anything. It's about God, first of all. And I think so many people get so caught up in what they're doing and then the troubles they're having, and then their view becomes just about them. All they can see is them. And then anything outside of that, they take personally. And what are people trying to do to me? And who's hurting me? And who's done what to me? And well, when you flip that over, now it's all about God. It's not about me anymore. And just that
Exactly.
shift in perspective is so important.
Yeah, and I like my analogy too, because like you said, when your hand's this way and the way you phrased it, in those situations where it's that way, your hand is already in a posture to push people away.
Yeah, yeah, that's
And
good.
this way, it's more inviting to bring them
Yeah,
back in, you know?
yeah, that's right.
Uh,
Yeah, when you talk about your wife being your number one priority, you use the word, minister to her, serve her, and that's the difference between I'll find her when I need her,
yeah.
or I'm going to do what I've actually been, called to do, which is serve her and minister to her. Can you talk a little bit about when you went to Mighty Oaks, the condition of that, or the situation that took you there, and then some of the things that you learned there that, you've invested in hundreds of guys since then. But for all of us, it starts by sitting on the couch and participating in the program. What got you there, and what were some of the things that really struck you that you said, I've got to, get this right and then invest in others?
I like this. I get to go public with this now. So at this point in my life, when I came to Mighty Oaks, it was, I had been medically discharged from the military prior to becoming a CW4, a Chief Warrant Officer 4 in the Army, aviation side, warrant officer side. And again, I was kind of back into this, kind of trying to turn this hand back sideways, and it was, still up this way. So I really felt like I lost my identity, which we hear often at Mighty Oaks. And I had, I
Yeah,
had lost my identity, not his.
sure.
And so immediately after that, I was trying to replace it, worried about the future, trying to control my future. And so I went back to college. Was working on a networking certificate to go with my degree, and also had been asked to run for Montana State Senate for Senate District 38. And I was like, wow, I get to move back into a leadership position, and
Yeah,
coming fresh out of the military, I get to use my military experience to help me, get elected, and I'll be this really cool uh, me thing again,
yep,
right? So in the middle of my campaign, I knew it, and I didn't think anybody else did, but I had this kind of like expiration date pre-planned. Um, I had this plan that I only had to make it to take care of my kids because I was done with this world. I had another excuse that I had adopted in my life. Even as a Christian, I'd heard that, if you commit suicide, you can't go to heaven. Well, I heard that wasn't true. So I already put this expiration date out there that I just had to take care of my last kid, which is my youngest daughter, Kayla. And so my plan was I just had to fight hard enough, long enough to get past that time. And then it would all be okay to check out. I hadn't told anybody that. I hadn't shared that with any therapists. I was keeping that private because as soon as you tell somebody, they do something, right? And they stop you.
right, right, right.
And but I had this friend, Clint, who noticed it, and I know a few other people noticed it as well. So I don't know if they were in cahoots together, but one day he said, "Hey, I heard about this thing called Mighty Oaks, and it's down in California, and I think we should go to it." And I says, "Yeah, you go ahead, buddy. That's right up your alley." And no offense to California, but from we don't like anybody. I was like, "Yeah, it's not even Montana, so you go ahead." He's like, "No, I really want you to go." I'm like, "Dude, I don't want to go. I don't want another veteran program. I'm good. You
Right.
know,
Right.
just whatever I need to help you and support." She goes, "Oh, cool. Would you? I don't want to be down there by myself and not know anybody." So he kind of pulled the buddy card and he said, "Would you
Yeah.
go with me?"
Right.
I'm like, "God, I really don't want to." He says, "Man, I really need it." That's what he said. I'm like, "Okay, buddy, I'll go with you."
Mhm.
Brandon at that time was handling all that stuff, and I remember him sending out his emails, and he could probably see the no reply coming back, and so he contacted Clint. Luckily, Brandon didn't quit, um, so I owe him a lot. He contacted Clint. Clint got the paperwork, and urged me to give him the paperwork so we could send that in, and we signed up for Mighty Oaks. A few weeks later, or I don't remember if it was even months later, I was watching this date come up on my calendar, and I was really hoping that Clint would have changed his mind because we didn't talk back and forth. And the night before we were supposed to leave, Clint says, "All right, cool. I'll pick you up at this time. We're
Hmm.
driving all the way to California." And so we drove down there to California, and I ended up at Mighty Oaks on time, literally on time. Um, that we were supposed to start, which I think is at that time was 4:30 or 5. I don't remember. And we walked straight in, sat down, um, and this Mighty Oaks thing was starting in front of me,
Yeah.
playing out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So while I was sitting there, I'd like to say this too. So when I got in there, I sat down. I was already against it. I was here for Clint. I was here to help him out, help my buddy out. But having been through programs like this, I knew the one thing I needed early and as fast as I could um, was to disqualify Mighty Oaks and their program. So from minute one, when they started getting up in front of us and welcoming us to Mighty Oaks, California, to the lodge, I was looking for fault. I was looking for reasons to discredit the guys in the program standing before me, and it didn't happen. And then we started teaching class after class after class, and I was even trying harder and harder and harder to find error in their use of scripture because I figured I was really educated in
Right.
that
Sure.
and qualified to discredit somebody. Uh, so I was really trying real hard to do that, and I couldn't do it. So then my next go-to was, well, they don't know what I've been through. Yeah, I get the combat thing. I get the law enforcement thing. Yeah, I see how those meld together. And yeah, we've been to Iraq or we've been to Afghanistan. We've seen some very traumatic things in our lives. And I was like, but they didn't know every flavor. And come to the end of the week, honestly, they covered everything, but they didn't cover at that session the trauma that I experienced as a child.
Right.
But by that point, when I saw the authenticity of these men, the honesty, uh, but more so where they were and this path of healing,
Yeah.
I couldn't deny that,
Yeah.
and that came to fruition by Heather's testimony. That we have a testimony there that really removed a lot of lies in my life, and then I started listening rather than fighting against the
Yeah.
process.
And Heather, she gives her testimony. She was a military spouse, and her husband ended his life. And she talks about, we say the other side of that, but what that looks like and how that unfolds. But yeah, powerful testimony.
Yeah, it's the one that pulled me out of my seat and kind of slapped me around a little bit and said, "Dude, there might be something to this.
Yeah.
Let's listen to these guys, and let's, as we say there, let's try something different."
Right. Let's try something try something different. What? So you've done this now for a long time. You talked literally to hundreds of guys, I would imagine. You've heard probably just about every story and every situation I can imagine that there is. And it is interesting because a lot of the folks who visit say, well, this is all about the military thing or the combat thing. Some people even disqualify themselves. They'll say, well, I served in the military, but I didn't do combat. I think you would acknowledge this as well. The majority of the people that attend our program, although they may have been in combat, that's really not what they're dealing with. Some of them are, but very few. Really, they're dealing with, like you, childhood trauma, relationship issues, identity issues, a lot of other stuff, and also service in the military or also combat service. Mm-hmm. So having talked to hundreds of people, dealt with hundreds of situations, you probably can't boil it all down to one thing. But if someone was sitting in front of you and said, I just need hope, I'm just broken, I need hope because of what happened in my past, because of what happened since then, because of the loss of friends, because of the loss of a relationship, where do I find hope? If you don't give it to me, if you don't tell me what to look for, I'm walking away. What do you say to them?
Well, I start very early off in the week by just asking the same question I asked myself. If I was to ask you, for me to live is what? How would you answer it?
Mm.
And not only as just someone that's trying to help them figure that out. I mean, I know the answer. I know what it is, but I'm waiting for them to first of all acknowledge the question, acknowledge that any answer they've tried to put in there has not worked. If they do know the answer, but have walked away from it, I shouldn't say walked away, either they became weak, unruly, or faint-hearted in that walk. I remind them that at the end, I ask if I can help them answer that question as we go through this week.
That's good.
And it comes down to, for me to live is Christ.
Yeah.
Some of the famous words by Paul.
Yeah.
In the scripture that we use, right? And I have the simplicity, that I talk to these guys. Faith is not difficult. It is not difficult to maneuver. It is not difficult to use. It is not difficult to find the answers in life. It doesn't require a special version. It doesn't require the whatever, the perfect pastor. But in God's word, with a perfect Father, we do find where He gives us that answer. For me to live is Christ, and that's the phase we're in right now. It does go on to say, but to die is gain. But for right now, we're to live. And then I slowly keep adding there that for me to live is Christ. This Christ that we speak of says, for me to live, or goes on to say in His own words, He says that I am come to give you life, and that you may have it more abundantly.
That's right.
And that's hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess, a Rosenbaum short answer, which wasn't so short, was it?
It's a great answer. And I think that's what hope is. It's where am I putting my focus? Where am I putting my attention? What am I looking at? And the reason people are hopeless is because they're looking inside of their own circle for a reason. And all those reasons fail them. And it's not until they elevate their view and look outside of their circle and understand there is one who is eternal, who's all powerful, who's never left them, who loves them, who's demonstrated it, and who gives, life more abundantly. That is the only place to find hope. And that's tremendous, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I just help them seek that way. And, it's just a pointing and a sharing with them process. The journey is theirs. You can't force them on it. You can't drag them on it. We can't force what we teach at Mighty Oaks on them, but we got to teach them that vertical discipline first.
That's great.
And then we start working on the other aspects of the relationships in life, the horizontal disciplines they need to work on as well.
That's awesome. Man, that's awesome. We need to have this conversation again, because I think there's a lot more to say there, but that's fantastic, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for sharing. I know it's not easy. I was talking today with someone, and they were asking why we tend to use story and testimony and those things. And you can tell somebody something all day long. You can give information, but until you connect it personally and make it real, it just lacks impact. And so I really appreciate you doing that and sharing, and for all the work that you continue to do, man. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
For sure. For those of you who are listening, thank you for listening. And if you're listening and not watching, jump over to YouTube, and you can find us there. Look for Mighty Oaks Foundation. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel. tons of content there we'd love to share with you. And if you know someone that could be helped, we serve veterans, active duty service members, the first responder community, spouses of those. We would love to help. Please reach out to us through our website, mightyoaksprograms.org, and we'd love to connect with you there. Thank you, and we will talk to you next time.